My name is Madison Mitchell. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how Halloween became the worst night of my life. Picture this. You're sitting around the dinner table with your family, everyone laughing and sharing stories, when suddenly your father drops a bomb that shatters everything you believed about your future. Imagine spending your entire life expecting something that would never come, building dreams on a foundation that was about to crumble. That's exactly what happened to me on October 31st, 2023, when my dad looked me straight in the eyes and said those words that still haunt me today. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted most, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is going to take you on an emotional roller coaster that you won't believe. The smell of pumpkin spice candles filled our family dining room as we gathered for our annual Halloween dinner tradition. My younger brother Jake was telling us about his college adventures, while my mom Linda was serving her famous apple pie. Everything seemed perfect, just like it had been for the past 28 years of my life. Our family had always been tight-knit, or so I thought, and these holiday gatherings meant everything to us. Little did I know that this Halloween would be the last time I'd feel truly comfortable in that house. Dad had been acting strange all week, but I chalked it up to work stress from running Mitchell & Sons Construction, the family business that had been our legacy for 3 generations. He kept glancing at legal documents on his desk and having hushed phone conversations that would stop the moment anyone walked into the room. My grandfather had built this company from nothing, turning it into a multi-million-dollar empire that employed half our small town in Colorado. I had always assumed that one day Jake and I would inherit this incredible legacy that represented decades of hard work and family pride. But there was something different in Dad's eyes that night, something I had never seen before. A mixture of guilt, determination, and what I can only describe as cold resolve. He kept fidgeting with his wedding ring, a nervous habit he developed whenever he had to deliver bad news. The way he looked at Jake and me across that dinner table should have been my first warning that our lives were about to change forever. It was like he was already saying goodbye to us, even though we were sitting right there, completely unaware of what was coming. As we finished dessert and Mom started clearing the plates, Dad cleared his throat and asked us all to sit back down. His voice had that serious tone he used during important business meetings, and suddenly the warm, family atmosphere turned ice cold. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong, but nothing could have prepared me for what he was about to say. You won't believe what happened next, because what came out of his mouth that night would shatter everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and the American dream. Let me tell you something about family legacy. It's like a heavy cloak that gets passed down from one generation to the next, and you spend your whole life preparing to wear it. Growing up as a Mitchell meant something in our town of Cedar Falls, Colorado, where everyone knew our family name was synonymous with quality construction and honest business practices. From the time I could walk, I was visiting construction sites with Dad, learning about blueprints, meeting clients, and understanding what it meant to build something that would last for generations. This wasn't just a business to us. It was our identity, our pride, and our ticket to financial security that most families could only dream of. If you're watching this and you come from a family business or have big expectations placed on you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, because you'll definitely relate to what I'm about to share. My grandfather, Robert Mitchell, started Mitchell & Sons with nothing but a hammer, a pickup truck, and an unshakable work ethic back in 1962. He built our family's reputation one house at a time, always treating his customers like family and never cutting corners on quality. By the time my father, David Mitchell, took over in the 90s, we were the go-to construction company for 3 counties, handling everything from custom homes to commercial buildings. The company was worth over $5 million, with a steady stream of contracts and a workforce of 35 loyal employees who had been with us for decades. This wasn't just success. This was generational wealth that most American families could only imagine. Every family dinner conversation revolved around the business, with Dad constantly teaching Jake and me about different aspects of construction, client relations, and financial management. He would say things like, "One day this will all be yours, and you need to understand every part of this business because you'll be running it someday." I spent summers working as a laborer on our job sites, learning the trade from the ground up, while Jake focused more on the business and accounting side during his college breaks. We weren't just kids growing up in a successful family. We were heirs being groomed to continue a legacy that had defined 3 generations of Mitchells. But here's what I didn't understand about family legacy until that Halloween night. It's not just about money or business success. It's about identity, belonging, and the deep psychological need to feel worthy of carrying forward something bigger than yourself. When you grow up expecting to inherit a family business, it becomes part of who you are, not just what you'll own someday. Every major life decision I made was filtered through the lens of, how will this affect my future role in the family business? I chose my college major, my career path, Even my relationships based on what I thought would best prepare me to be a worthy successor to the Mitchell legacy. The weight of that expectation was both a blessing and a burden that shaped every aspect of my personality and ambitions. I worked twice as hard as my peers because I knew I had a reputation to uphold and a legacy to prove myself worthy of inheriting. But what happens when that legacy you've built your entire identity around suddenly gets ripped away without warning? What happens when the very foundation of your future crumbles in a single conversation? That's exactly what I was about to discover, and it would teach me a lesson about family, loyalty, and self-worth that I never saw coming. That Halloween evening started like any other family gathering, but there were subtle signs that something was brewing beneath the surface. Jake had driven down from Denver University for the weekend, excited to share stories about his business classes and his plans for joining the company after graduation. Mom had spent all day preparing our traditional Halloween feast: roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, and her famous pumpkin cheesecake that we'd been enjoying since we were kids. The house was decorated with carved pumpkins and autumn leaves, creating that warm, cozy atmosphere that made our family dinners so special. If you've ever had that gut feeling that something big was about to happen but couldn't quite put your finger on it, hit that subscribe button and like this video, because you'll know exactly what I was going through. But as we sat down to eat, I noticed Dad wasn't his usual cheerful self during these gatherings. He barely touched his food, which was unusual because Mom's cooking was his absolute favorite, and he would normally go back for seconds or thirds. His phone kept buzzing with text messages and calls, but instead of ignoring them like he usually did during family time, he kept glancing at the screen with a worried expression. When Jake asked him about the upcoming construction season and potential new projects, Dad gave vague, short answers instead of his typical enthusiastic discussions about the business. It was like he was physically present, but mentally somewhere else entirely. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, even though none of us could understand why. Mom kept trying to lighten the mood by asking about our Halloween costumes from childhood and sharing funny memories, but Dad would just nod and give half-hearted smiles. Jake and I exchanged confused glances across the table, both sensing that something was seriously wrong, but not wanting to ruin the family dinner by asking direct questions. The usual warmth and laughter that filled our dining room during these special occasions was replaced by an uncomfortable silence that made everyone fidget in their chairs. Even the autumn decorations seemed to mock the somber mood that had settled over our family. What made it even more unsettling was the stack of official-looking documents that Dad had placed on the kitchen counter earlier that evening. I had caught a glimpse of them when I was helping Mom with the dishes, and they looked like legal papers with lots of official seals and signatures. When I casually asked Dad about them, he quickly moved the papers to his home office and said they were just business stuff that could wait until after dinner. But the way he clutched those documents and the nervous energy in his voice told me they were anything but routine business paperwork. Something big was definitely coming, and none of us were prepared for it. As we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, I could feel the weight of anticipation pressing down on all of us like a storm cloud ready to burst. Dad kept checking his watch and glancing toward his office as if he was waiting for the right moment to drop whatever bombshell he had been carrying around all week. The Halloween decorations that had seemed so festive earlier now felt ominous, like they were setting the stage for some kind of horror movie that was about to unfold in our own home. Little did I know that in just a few minutes, those legal documents would destroy everything I had ever believed about my future, my family, and my place in the Mitchell legacy. What happened next would turn our Halloween celebration into the most devastating night of my entire life. When Dad finally stood up and cleared his throat, asking us all to gather around the dining room table again, my heart started racing like I had just run a marathon. The way he looked at Jake and me, with a mixture of sadness, determination, and something that looked almost like an apology, made my stomach drop to the floor. He walked slowly to his office, retrieved those mysterious legal documents, and spread them out on the table in front of us like he was dealing cards in a poker game. The silence in that room was deafening, broken only by the ticking of our old grandfather clock and the sound of our own nervous breathing. If you've ever been in a situation where you knew your life was about to change forever, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because what happened next will shock you just as much as it shocked me. "Kids," Dad began, his voice shaking slightly as he looked down at the papers instead of meeting our eyes. "There's something I need to tell you about the future of Mitchell & Sons Construction." The formal way he said our company name sent chills down my spine because he had never spoken about our family business like that before. It was always just the business, or our company, in casual, loving terms. Jake reached over and grabbed my hand under the table, both of us instinctively knowing that whatever Dad was about to say would change everything. Mom's face had gone completely pale, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes, which told me she already knew what was coming. The Halloween decorations around us suddenly felt like they were mocking our family's impending doom. The construction industry has changed dramatically over the past few years, Dad continued, shuffling through the legal documents like he was reading from a script. We've been struggling with increased competition from larger corporations, rising material costs, and labor shortages that have made it nearly impossible to maintain our profit margins. This was news to Jake and me because Dad had always painted a picture of a thriving, successful business that was only growing stronger each year. He had never mentioned any financial troubles or industry challenges during our regular family discussions about the company's future. The betrayal I felt in that moment wasn't just about what he was telling us, but about all the things he had apparently been hiding from us for months or even years. After months of consultation with lawyers, accountants, and business advisors, Dad said, his voice getting stronger but his hands still trembling as he pointed to specific sections of the documents, I've made the difficult decision to sell Mitchell & Sons Construction to Brennan Industries, a larger construction firm out of Denver. The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest, and I actually gasped out loud because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jake's grip on my hand tightened so much it almost hurt, and I could hear Mom quietly crying behind us, confirming that this wasn't some kind of sick Halloween prank. Our entire future, everything we had worked toward and planned for, was being sold to strangers without any input or discussion from the people who were supposed to inherit it. This means, Dad concluded, looking directly at Jake and me for the first time since he started this devastating speech, that there will be no inheritance for either of you from the family business. The sale will provide enough money for your mother and me to retire comfortably, but there won't be anything left over for you kids. The room started spinning around me as the full impact of his words sank in, and I felt like I was going to be sick right there at our family dinner table. 28 years of expectations, dreams, and life plans had just been destroyed in a single sentence, delivered as casually as if he was telling us what he wanted for breakfast. But what hurt the most wasn't just the financial loss. It was the realization that the man I had trusted and looked up to my entire life had been planning this behind our backs for months, treating Jake and me like we were just employees to be laid off rather than his own children who had devoted their lives to carrying on his legacy. The silence that followed Dad's announcement was the most deafening sound I had ever experienced in my entire life. It was like someone had sucked all the air out of the room, leaving us gasping for breath while trying to process what had just happened to our family. Jake was the first to break the silence, his voice barely above a whisper as he asked, "Dad, are you serious? This isn't some kind of Halloween joke, right?" But the look in Dad's eyes told us everything we needed to know. This was real, this was final, and our entire future had just been ripped away from us without any warning or discussion. I felt like I was drowning in my own chair, struggling to understand how the man who had raised me could deliver such devastating news with the same tone he used to discuss the weather. The physical sensation of rejection hit me like a bucket of ice water being poured over my head on the coldest day of winter. My hands started shaking uncontrollably. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and I felt this overwhelming wave of nausea wash over me like I had just been punched in the stomach. It's impossible to describe the feeling of having your entire identity and future stripped away in a single conversation, especially by the person you trusted most in the world. Everything I thought I knew about my family, my future, and my worth as a daughter was crumbling around me like a house of cards in a hurricane. The Halloween decorations that had seemed so cheerful just minutes earlier now looked like they were mocking our family's destruction. Mom was openly crying now, her tears falling into her coffee cup as she sat there helplessly watching her husband destroy their children's futures. She kept looking back and forth between Dad and us, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words to fix what had just been broken. Jake was staring at the legal documents spread across our dinner table, his face turning red with a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief. I could see him trying to process the numbers and legal jargon, probably hoping to find some loophole or misunderstanding that would make this whole nightmare go away. But those official seals and signatures told the real story. This wasn't a mistake or a bad dream that we could wake up from. The worst part wasn't even the financial loss, although losing a multi-million-dollar inheritance definitely stung more than I can put into words. What really crushed me was the realization that Dad had made this monumental decision without consulting Jake and me, treating us like outsiders rather than the children who had dedicated their entire lives to preparing for this responsibility. We had spent summers working construction jobs, chosen our college majors based on what would benefit the family business, and made countless personal sacrifices because we believed we were working towards something bigger than ourselves. Now it felt like all of those sacrifices had been meaningless, like we had been playing a game where the rules were suddenly changed without anyone telling us. As I sat there trying to absorb the magnitude of what had just happened, I felt something inside me break that I didn't even know could be broken. It was like discovering that your entire identity was built on a lie, that everything you thought you knew about your place in the world was just an illusion created by someone else's expectations. The Mitchell family legacy that had defined 3 generations was being sold to strangers, and Jake and I were being cast aside like we had never mattered at all. But what I didn't realize in that moment of devastating shock was that this rejection, as painful as it was, would eventually become the catalyst for something far more powerful than anything I could have inherited. As the initial shock began to wear off, it was replaced by a burning sensation in my chest that I can only describe as pure, unadulterated rage, mixed with a deep sense of betrayal. The more I thought about Dad's decision, the more I realized how unfair and selfish it really was, especially considering how much Jake and I had sacrificed for the family business over the years. While our friends were enjoying typical college experiences, partying and exploring different career paths, we had been working construction jobs every summer and studying business management because we thought we were preparing to inherit something meaningful. Every major decision we had made as young adults was filtered through the lens of, what's best for the family business? And now we were discovering that none of it mattered because Dad had been planning to sell out from under us all along. The injustice of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks when I started thinking about all the personal sacrifices I had made for a future that was never going to exist. I had turned down job offers from other companies because I thought I needed to stay loyal to the family business that would eventually be mine. I had ended a serious relationship with my college boyfriend because he wanted to move to California for his career, and I couldn't leave Colorado because of my responsibilities to Mitchell & Sons Construction. I had chosen my apartment, my car, even my social circle based on what I thought would be appropriate for someone who was going to inherit a multi-million-dollar construction company. Now all of those sacrifices felt like they had been made for nothing, like I had been living someone else's life while my real life passed me by. What made the betrayal even worse was realizing that Dad had probably been planning this sale for months, maybe even years, while continuing to encourage Jake and me to make life decisions based on inheriting the business. He had sat through countless family dinners where we discussed our future roles in the company, nodding and offering advice like he was genuinely invested in our success as his heirs. Just last Christmas, he had given me a leather portfolio with Madison Mitchell, future CEO, engraved on the front, telling me how proud he was of my dedication to carrying on the family legacy. Now that portfolio felt like a cruel joke, a symbol of promises that were never meant to be kept, and expectations that were built on lies. The psychological impact of this kind of rejection runs much deeper than just financial disappointment. It attacks your very sense of self-worth and belonging within your own family. When a parent makes a major decision that affects your entire future, without consulting you or considering your feelings, it sends a message that you don't matter, that your opinions and dreams are irrelevant to the people who are supposed to love you most. I started questioning everything about my relationship with Dad, wondering if he had ever really seen me as a capable future business owner, or if he had just been humoring me all these years while secretly planning to cut me out. The doubt and insecurity that crept into my mind during those dark hours after his announcement would haunt me for months to come. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and replaying every conversation I had ever had with Dad about the business, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The little girl who had always sought her father's approval and tried to live up to his expectations was dying, being replaced by someone harder, more determined, and infinitely more self-reliant. I realized that if I was going to build any kind of successful future for myself, it would have to be entirely on my own terms, without relying on family connections or inherited wealth. That night, in the darkness of my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of dreams that would never come true, I made a decision that would change the entire trajectory of my life. But I had no idea just how difficult and lonely the journey ahead would be, or how much I would have to sacrifice to prove to myself, and eventually to my family, that I was capable of creating something even better than what I had lost. Over the next few days after that devastating Halloween dinner, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about inheritance, family loyalty, and what it really means to be worthy of carrying on a legacy. I spent hours walking around our small town, looking at all the businesses and homes that Mitchell & Sons had built over the decades, wondering if any of it had ever really belonged to us, or if it was all just an illusion that Dad had allowed us to believe. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that inheritance isn't just about money or property. It's about recognition, validation, and the deep human need to feel like we matter to the people who raised us. It's about knowing that your parents see you as capable and worthy of carrying forward something they've spent their entire lives building. If you've ever felt like you weren't good enough for your own family's approval, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button because this story is about discovering your own worth when everyone else fails to see it. What I discovered during those dark days of reflection was that I had confused inheritance with identity in a way that was both dangerous and limiting to my personal growth. For 28 years, I had built my entire sense of self around being the future inheritor of Mitchell & Sons Construction, allowing that expectation to define not just my career path, but my fundamental understanding of who I was as a person. When that inheritance was suddenly taken away, I felt like I had lost myself completely because I had never learned to separate my own worth from my family's wealth and reputation. It was like trying to stand up after someone had pulled away a chair you didn't even realize you were leaning on, leaving you stumbling and confused about how to support yourself without that external validation. But here's what I learned about the true nature of inheritance during those difficult weeks of soul-searching and self-doubt. Real inheritance isn't something that can be given or taken away by another person, even if that person is your own father. It's the collection of skills, values, work ethic, and inner strength that you develop through your own experiences and choices. The most valuable things my grandfather and father had actually passed down to me weren't the business assets or financial security, but the lessons about hard work, integrity, and perseverance that I had learned from watching them build something meaningful from nothing. Those qualities lived inside me and couldn't be sold to Brennan Industries or taken away by legal documents, no matter what Dad decided to do with the family company. The painful irony of Dad's decision was that by trying to protect Jake and me from the stress and uncertainty of running a family business in a challenging economy, he had actually robbed us of the opportunity to prove ourselves worthy of that responsibility. He had made assumptions about our capabilities and desires without ever asking us what we wanted, or giving us the chance to step up and help solve the company's problems together as a family. Maybe we could have found creative solutions to the financial challenges he was facing, or maybe we could have brought fresh ideas and energy that would have revitalized the business for the next generation. But we'll never know because he chose to handle everything alone, treating us like children who needed to be protected rather than partners who could have contributed to the family's success. What hurt the most was realizing that Dad's decision revealed how little faith he actually had in Jake's and my ability to carry on the Mitchell legacy with honor and success. Despite all our years of preparation, all our sacrifices and dedication to learning the business, he apparently didn't believe we were capable of handling the challenges that came with ownership and leadership. That lack of confidence from the person whose opinion mattered most to us was almost more devastating than losing the inheritance itself. But as painful as this realization was, it also planted a seed of determination in my heart that would eventually grow into something much more powerful than anything I could have inherited. I was about to discover that the most meaningful legacy isn't the one you receive from your parents. It's the one you create for yourself through your own courage, creativity, and refusal to give up when everyone else counts you out. Looking back on that Halloween night when my world fell apart, I've come to realize that family inheritance is a lot like wearing a Halloween mask. It gives you a temporary identity that looks impressive from the outside, but underneath, you're still just yourself, hoping that the mask won't slip off and reveal who you really are. For most of my life, I had been wearing the Mitchell family heiress mask, feeling confident and secure because of the identity it gave me in our community and in my own mind. People looked at me differently when they knew I was going to inherit a multi-million-dollar construction company with more respect, more interest, and more assumptions about my intelligence and capabilities. But when Dad ripped that mask away on Halloween night, I was forced to confront the terrifying question of who Madison Mitchell really was, without the family name and wealth to define her. The Halloween timing of Dad's announcement felt like some kind of cosmic joke, because Halloween is all about pretending to be someone you're not, hiding behind costumes and masks that transform you into something more exciting or powerful than your everyday self. Our entire family had been wearing masks for years. Dad pretending he was building a legacy for his children while secretly planning to sell the business, Mom pretending everything was fine while knowing about his plans, and Jake and I pretending we were prepared to inherit something that was never actually going to be ours. When all those masks came off that night, we were left staring at each other like strangers, wondering who we really were without all the pretenses and expectations that had defined our relationships for so long. The beautiful thing about Halloween masks, though, is that they're supposed to come off at the end of the night, revealing the real person underneath who was there all along. What I discovered after the initial shock and devastation of losing my inheritance mask was that the real Madison Mitchell was actually much stronger, more creative, and more resilient than the sheltered heiress I had been pretending to be. Without the safety net of family wealth and connections, I was forced to develop skills and confidence that I never knew I possessed. I had to learn to network with strangers instead of relying on Dad's existing relationships, to solve problems with creativity instead of just throwing money at them, and to believe in myself without the external validation of being chosen as the family heir. The mask analogy became even more powerful when I started thinking about all the successful entrepreneurs and business leaders who built empires without any family inheritance at all. People like Oprah Winfrey, Howard Schultz, and Jan Koum didn't need inherited wealth or family businesses to create something meaningful and valuable. They used their own talents, determination, and vision to build legacies that were entirely their own creation. They never had the luxury of wearing an inheritance mask because they started with nothing, which meant they had to develop real substance and character from the very beginning. In many ways, they were at an advantage because they never had to worry about losing something they never had in the first place, and they never had to prove they were worthy of something that was given to them instead of earned. What I realized was that Dad's decision to sell the family business and cut Jake and me out of the inheritance had actually given us an unexpected gift, the opportunity to discover who we really were without the masks we had been wearing our whole lives. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time, like being pushed off a cliff and discovering you could fly just when you thought you were going to crash. The Halloween mask of inheritance had been comfortable and secure, but it had also been limiting my potential and keeping me from developing my own unique strengths and capabilities. Now that the mask was gone forever, I was free to become whoever I wanted to be, to build whatever kind of life and legacy felt authentic to my own values and dreams. Little did I know that this newfound freedom would lead me on a journey that was far more challenging and rewarding than simply inheriting someone else's success could ever have been. About 2 weeks after that devastating Halloween dinner, I was sitting in my apartment staring at a stack of rejection letters from job applications when something inside me finally snapped, but not in the way you might expect. Instead of breaking down into self-pity or anger, I felt this surge of determination that was unlike anything I had ever experienced before in my life. I looked around at my small apartment, filled with reminders of a future that would never exist, and made a decision that would change everything. If Dad didn't think Jake and I were worthy of inheriting his legacy, then I would prove him wrong by building something even better on my own. The thought of showing up to next year's family gathering as a successful entrepreneur instead of a disappointed daughter gave me more motivation than any inheritance ever could have. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It was about proving to myself and everyone else that Madison Mitchell didn't need anyone's permission or approval to create something extraordinary. The first step was the hardest because it meant completely letting go of the life I had planned and embracing a future that was entirely uncertain and terrifying. I took down all the Mitchell & Sons construction memorabilia from my walls, packed away the business books and industry magazines I had been collecting for years, and started researching completely different industries where I could make my mark without any connection to the family business. The symbolism of clearing out those reminders of my old dreams was both heartbreaking and liberating, like cleaning out a closet full of clothes that no longer fit the person you were becoming. I spent hours online researching successful entrepreneurs who had started with nothing, reading their stories and trying to understand what separated the dreamers from the achievers in the business world. What struck me most about those success stories was how many of them involved people who had been rejected, underestimated, or counted out by the very people who should have supported them. Steve Jobs was fired from his own company. Colonel Sanders was rejected by over 1,000 restaurants before KFC became successful. And Vera Wang didn't start her fashion empire until she was 40 years old after being passed over for a promotion at Vogue. These weren't people who inherited their success or had everything handed to them. They were individuals who refused to let other people's limitations define their potential. Reading their stories made me realize that Dad's rejection might actually be the best thing that could have happened to me, even though it didn't feel that way at the time. The industry I decided to focus on was digital marketing and e-commerce, something completely different from construction but with huge growth potential and relatively low startup costs. I figured that if I was going to build something from scratch, I might as well choose a field where innovation and creativity mattered more than family connections or inherited resources. I started taking online courses, attending virtual networking events, and reaching out to successful entrepreneurs in the digital space who might be willing to share their knowledge with someone who was hungry to learn. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was preparing to enter an industry that Dad probably didn't even understand, let alone respect, which felt like the perfect way to prove that his old-fashioned ideas about business and legacy were becoming obsolete. By the end of that month, I had developed a detailed business plan for a digital marketing agency that would help small construction companies build their online presence and compete with larger corporations like the one that had bought Mitchell & Sons. The poetic justice of using my knowledge of the construction industry to help Dad's former competitors was almost too perfect to be accidental. It felt like the universe was giving me a chance to turn my greatest disappointment into my biggest advantage. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, lonely, and filled with challenges that would test every ounce of strength and determination I possessed. But for the first time since that Halloween night, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny, building toward a future that belonged entirely to me, rather than waiting for someone else to decide what I deserved. The day I officially launched Mitchell Digital Marketing Agency, yes, I kept the family name, but now it represented my legacy instead of Dad's. I had exactly $3,000 in my savings account, a used laptop, and absolutely no idea what I was doing. But what I lacked in resources and experience, I made up for with pure determination and a work ethic that would have made my grandfather proud. I rented the smallest office space I could find in downtown Cedar Falls, furnished it with secondhand furniture from Craigslist, and started cold calling construction companies all over Colorado to offer my digital marketing services. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, like jumping out of an airplane without knowing if your parachute would work, but finally taking action felt infinitely better than sitting around feeling sorry for myself. If you're watching this and you've ever had to start over from scratch after a major disappointment, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, because this journey is going to show you exactly what's possible when you refuse to give up on yourself. Building a business from nothing is like constructing a house with your bare hands. You have to lay every single brick yourself, and there's no one else to blame if the foundation isn't solid enough to support your dreams. I spent 18-hour days learning everything I could about search engine optimization, social media marketing, website design, and client relations, often falling asleep at my desk with textbooks and tutorial videos still playing on my laptop. Every morning, I would wake up in my tiny apartment, look in the mirror, and remind myself that I was building something that no one could ever take away from me, something that would prove I was worthy of success regardless of what my father thought about my capabilities. The loneliness was overwhelming at times because I didn't have business partners, investors, or family members cheering me on. Just me, my determination, and a growing list of potential clients who needed help competing in the digital marketplace. The first few months were brutal because I was learning everything through trial and error, while simultaneously trying to deliver results for the handful of clients who had taken a chance on my inexperienced agency. I made mistakes that cost me sleep and money, lost potential deals because I quoted prices too low or too high, and struggled with imposter syndrome every single day as I tried to convince successful business owners that a 28-year-old woman with no formal marketing experience could help them grow their companies. There were nights when I would lie awake wondering if Dad had been right to doubt my abilities, if maybe I really wasn't cut out for the pressure and responsibility that comes with building something meaningful from scratch. But every time I felt like giving up, I would remember the look in his eyes when he told Jake and me that we weren't worthy of inheriting his legacy, and that memory would fuel my determination to prove him wrong. What kept me going during those dark early days was the realization that I was learning skills and developing character traits that no inheritance could have given me. I was becoming resourceful, resilient, and self-reliant in ways that would have been impossible if I had simply stepped into a ready-made role at Mitchell & Sons Construction. Every client I won, every problem I solved, and every dollar I earned was proof that I was capable of creating value in the world without relying on anyone else's reputation or resources. The construction analogy became very real for me. I was literally building my own foundation, brick by brick, without any help from the family that had raised me to believe I needed their approval and support to succeed in business. By the end of my first year, Mitchell Digital Marketing Agency had grown from just me working alone in a tiny office to a team of 5 employees serving over 30 construction companies across 3 states. Our revenue had reached 6 figures, and I was starting to get recognition in the local business community as an innovative entrepreneur who was helping traditional industries adapt to the digital age. The irony was that my success was built on knowledge I had gained from growing up in the construction industry. I understood my clients' challenges, spoke their language, and could offer solutions that generic marketing agencies couldn't provide. Dad's rejection had forced me to combine my inherited knowledge with newly developed skills in a way that created something unique and valuable, something that was entirely my own creation, but couldn't have existed without the foundation he had unknowingly provided. What I didn't realize yet was that my growing success was about to create a situation that would bring my family back into my life in a way I never could have anticipated. The success of my digital marketing agency came with a price that I hadn't anticipated when I first decided to prove my worth by building something on my own. As my business grew and my reputation in the industry expanded, I found myself increasingly isolated from the life I had known before that devastating Halloween dinner. My old friends didn't know how to relate to the driven, workaholic version of myself I had become, and making new friends seemed impossible when I was spending 16-hour days focused entirely on building my company. The loneliness hit me hardest during holidays and family gatherings that I started avoiding because facing Dad felt too painful, and pretending everything was normal seemed impossible when so much had changed between us. Success, I discovered, can be just as isolating as failure, especially when you're achieving it entirely on your own terms without the support system you thought would always be there. The emotional toll of carrying everything by myself was something I hadn't prepared for during those early days when determination and anger were fueling my every decision. There were countless nights when I would sit in my office long after my employees had gone home, surrounded by the evidence of my growing success, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. I couldn't celebrate victories with family members who had essentially written me off, and I couldn't share my struggles with people who wouldn't understand the unique pressure of trying to prove your worth to parents who had already decided you weren't good enough. The weight of constantly having to be strong, confident, and capable was exhausting in ways that no amount of business success could compensate for. Dating became nearly impossible because most people in our small town knew about the Mitchell family drama, and potential romantic partners either assumed I was bitter and vindictive, or worried that I was too driven and ambitious to make time for a relationship. The few men I tried to date couldn't understand why I was working so hard when my family had money, not realizing that the whole point was to prove I didn't need their money or approval to build something meaningful. I found myself lying awake at night wondering if the price of independence and self-reliance was going to be permanent loneliness, if proving my worth meant sacrificing the connections and relationships that make life meaningful. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to show everyone I didn't need them, I had created a situation where I really didn't have them anymore. The hardest part was dealing with moments of self-doubt that would creep in during quiet times when I wasn't distracted by the constant demands of running a growing business. There were days when I would see other families celebrating together, supporting each other through challenges, and I would wonder if I had made a terrible mistake by choosing pride and independence over forgiveness and reconciliation. Maybe Dad had been right about the stress and uncertainty of business ownership. Maybe I was putting myself through unnecessary hardship just to prove a point that nobody else really cared about. The voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like his would whisper that I was being stubborn and foolish, that I could end this self-imposed exile anytime I wanted by simply accepting his decision and moving on with a more traditional life path. But every time I considered giving up the fight and trying to rebuild bridges with my family, I would remember why I had started this journey in the first place. Not just to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself that I was capable of creating something meaningful without anyone else's permission or approval. The loneliness was real and painful, but it was also teaching me lessons about inner strength and self-reliance that I never could have learned if I had taken the easier path of acceptance and forgiveness. I was discovering that sometimes the most important battles we fight are the ones we have to fight completely alone, even when the isolation feels like it might kill us before we reach the victory we're working toward. What I didn't know yet was that this period of solitude and self-doubt was preparing me for a confrontation that would test everything I had learned about my own worth and resilience. 2.5 years after that life-changing Halloween dinner, I was standing in the conference room of my expanded office space, looking out at a team of 15 employees who had helped Mitchell Digital Marketing Agency become the fastest-growing marketing firm in Colorado's construction industry. We had just signed a contract with a major Denver-based construction company that would double our revenue for the next fiscal year, and the celebration happening around me felt surreal compared to the lonely nights I had spent building this dream one client at a time. What made this moment even sweeter was knowing that every dollar we had earned, every client we had won, and every employee we had hired was the result of my own creativity, determination, and hard work, rather than inherited wealth or family connections. This wasn't success that had been given to me. This was success that I had created from nothing, and nobody could ever take it away from me. The financial rewards were gratifying, but they paled in comparison to the deep sense of personal satisfaction that came from knowing I had proven every doubter wrong, including the voice of self-doubt that had lived in my own head for so long. My company was generating over $2 million in annual revenue. I owned my office building, and I had a team of talented professionals who respected my leadership and vision for the future. But more importantly, I had developed skills, confidence, and business instincts that no amount of inherited wealth could have provided, qualities that would serve me well regardless of what challenges the future might bring. Every day brought new evidence that I was not only capable of running a successful business, but that I was actually better at it than I had ever imagined possible during those years of waiting to inherit someone else's company. The recognition from the business community was validation I hadn't expected, but deeply appreciated after years of being treated like Dad's disappointing daughter, rather than a capable professional in my own right. I was invited to speak at industry conferences, featured in local business magazines, and asked to serve on the board of directors for the Colorado Small Business Association. Other entrepreneurs would seek me out for advice about digital marketing, business growth strategies, and how to compete with larger corporations in traditional industries. The respect and credibility I was earning felt infinitely more meaningful than the superficial attention I used to receive as the Mitchell family heiress, because this recognition was based on actual accomplishments rather than expectations about what I might achieve someday. What surprised me most about success was how it changed my relationship with failure and risk-taking in ways that would have been impossible if I had simply inherited a ready-made business. Every setback had become a learning opportunity rather than a catastrophe. Every challenge was something I could solve with creativity and persistence rather than panic about. The confidence that comes from knowing you built something from scratch makes you fearless in ways that people who inherit success can never fully understand, because you know that even if everything falls apart, you have the skills and determination to build it back up again. This kind of unshakable self-reliance was worth more than any inheritance could ever be, because it gave me the power to create my own security rather than depending on someone else's decisions about my worthiness. As I stood there watching my team celebrate our latest victory, I realized that Dad's rejection had been the greatest gift he could have given me, even though it certainly hadn't felt that way at the time. By forcing me to build my own legacy instead of inheriting his, he had unknowingly given me something far more valuable than money or property. He had given me the opportunity to discover my own strength, creativity, and capability. I was no longer Madison Mitchell, the disappointed daughter who wasn't good enough to inherit the family business. I was Madison Mitchell, the successful entrepreneur who had built something incredible through her own vision and determination. But what I didn't realize yet was that my growing success was about to create a situation that would bring my family back into my life in the most unexpected and ironic way possible. 3 years after that devastating Halloween dinner, I was attending the annual Colorado Construction Industry Awards ceremony when I saw Dad across the crowded ballroom, looking older and more tired than I remembered. He was sitting at a table with Mom and Jake, probably expecting another routine evening of networking and industry recognition, when the announcer called my name as the winner of Entrepreneur of the Year for revolutionizing how construction companies approach digital marketing. The shock on his face when I walked up to accept the award was worth every lonely night, every rejected proposal, and every moment of doubt I had endured while building my company from nothing. As I stood at that podium, looking out at an audience full of industry leaders who were applauding my success, I realized that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so successful that the people who rejected you can't ignore your accomplishments anymore. If you've ever dreamed of having a moment like this where you prove everyone wrong, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, because what happened next will give you chills. During my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of innovation in traditional industries and thanked all the small construction companies who had trusted a young entrepreneur with their digital marketing needs. I could see Dad leaning forward in his seat, probably trying to process the fact that his unworthy daughter was being celebrated as a leader in the industry he had spent his entire career working in. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. Here I was, receiving recognition for helping construction companies compete with large corporations like Brennan Industries, the same company that had bought Mitchell & Sons Construction and eliminated the jobs of several longtime employees. My success was built on everything Dad had taught me about the construction industry, combined with skills he didn't understand and couldn't appreciate when he made his decision to sell the family business. After the ceremony, I was surrounded by people congratulating me and asking for business cards when I noticed Dad approaching through the crowd, with Mom and Jake trailing nervously behind him. The walk across that ballroom probably felt like the longest journey of his life, and I could see him struggling to find words that would bridge the 3-year gap of silence and hurt feelings between us. When he finally reached me, he stood there for a moment, looking at the crystal award in my hands and the business card someone had just handed me with Madison Mitchell CEO printed in elegant letters. The man who had once told me I wasn't worthy of inheriting his legacy was now face to face with evidence that I had built something even more impressive on my own, without his help, approval, or financial support. "Madison," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the celebration happening around us. "I had no idea you had accomplished so much. I'm proud of what you've built." The words I had been waiting to hear for 3 years felt strange and hollow now that they were finally being spoken, because I had moved beyond needing his validation to feel successful and worthy. Mom was crying, Jake looked stunned, and I could see other family friends and industry colleagues watching our reunion with fascination, probably wondering if there would be a dramatic reconciliation or continued family drama. But what they were witnessing wasn't the angry confrontation I had imagined during those early days of building my business. It was something much more powerful and satisfying than any act of revenge could ever be. Looking into Dad's eyes, I could see genuine regret mixed with confusion about how he had so completely misjudged my potential and determination. He was realizing that by trying to protect Jake and me from business challenges, he had actually robbed us of the opportunity to prove ourselves and grow into the leaders we were capable of becoming. The family legacy he thought he was preserving by selling to Brennan Industries was actually thriving in a completely different form through my digital marketing agency, which was now helping dozens of construction companies succeed in ways that Mitchell & Sons never had. This wasn't the bitter, angry revenge I had fantasized about during those lonely early days. This was something far sweeter and more meaningful. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had not only survived his rejection, but had used it as fuel to build something extraordinary that belonged entirely to me. Standing there in that ballroom, accepting congratulations from industry leaders while my family watched in amazement, I realized that the most important lesson of this entire journey wasn't about business success or family relationships. It was about discovering the difference between inherited worth and self-created value. For 28 years, I had been waiting for someone else to decide I was worthy of carrying on a legacy, measuring my value by external validation and approval from people who didn't really understand my capabilities or potential. But true legacy isn't something that gets handed down from one generation to the next like a piece of family jewelry. It's something you build through your own choices, failures, successes, and determination to create something meaningful, regardless of what anyone else thinks about your abilities. The Mitchell name on my business cards now represents my vision, my hard work, and my refusal to accept limitations that other people tried to place on my future. What I discovered through this painful but transformative journey is that the best inheritance any parent can give their children isn't money, property, or a ready-made business. It's the confidence, skills, and character traits that enable them to build their own success from whatever circumstances life presents. Dad thought he was protecting Jake and me by selling the family business before we could fail at running it, but what he actually did was give us the greatest gift possible, the necessity to discover our own strength, creativity, and resilience. Without the safety net of inherited wealth, I was forced to develop problem-solving skills, emotional toughness, and business instincts that would serve me far better than simply managing someone else's established company ever could have. The construction industry metaphors that had defined my family for 3 generations took on new meaning as I built my own empire from the ground up. Just like my grandfather had started with a hammer and a pickup truck, I started with nothing but determination and a willingness to learn from every mistake and setback. But unlike him, I didn't have to worry about whether my children would be worthy of inheriting what I built, because I was teaching them through my example that real security comes from knowing you can create value in the world, regardless of your circumstances. My legacy wouldn't be measured by how much wealth I could pass down, but by how well I prepared the next generation to build their own dreams without depending on anyone else's approval or support. The irony of Dad's original decision became crystal clear that night, as I realized that Mitchell & Sons construction had always been limited by traditional thinking and resistance to change, while my digital marketing agency was helping construction companies adapt and thrive in a rapidly evolving marketplace. By forcing me out of the family business, he had unknowingly freed me to innovate and succeed in ways that would have been impossible within the constraints of the established company culture. My success wasn't despite his rejection, it was because of it. Because sometimes we need to be pushed out of our comfort zones before we can discover what we're truly capable of achieving when we stop waiting for permission and start taking action. Looking back on that devastating Halloween dinner and everything that followed, I can honestly say it was the best thing that ever happened to me, even though it was also the most painful experience of my life up to that point. Dad's decision taught me that real legacy isn't about what you inherit from previous generations. It's about what you create for future ones through your own courage, determination, and refusal to accept anyone else's limitations on your potential. The Mitchell family name now represents something completely different than it did when I was growing up, and that something is entirely my own creation. Every young person who feels underestimated, rejected, or told they're not good enough needs to understand this fundamental truth. The most meaningful legacy you can build is the one that proves everyone wrong while staying true to your own values and vision for what's possible. Your worth isn't determined by what other people choose to give you. It's determined by what you choose to create for yourself when everyone else counts you out. As I finish telling you this story about how rejection became the catalyst for the most meaningful success of my life, I want you to think about your own moments of disappointment and betrayal, because I guarantee you've had them, and I guarantee they contain seeds of opportunity that you might not have recognized yet. Whether it's a family member who underestimated you, a boss who passed you over for promotion, or anyone who made you feel like you weren't good enough, those painful experiences can become the fuel for achievements that surpass anything you could have inherited or been given by someone else. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own struggles with family expectations or feeling undervalued, make sure to hit that subscribe button and smash the like button, because I want to continue sharing stories that prove ordinary people can build extraordinary lives when they refuse to accept other people's limitations. Your engagement helps me reach more people who need to hear that their worth isn't determined by what others think of them. So please take a second to show some love for this video. The question I want you to ask yourself after hearing my story is this. What would you have done in my position when Dad announced he was selling the family business without consulting Jake and me about our futures? Would you have fought for your inheritance, accepted his decision gracefully, or chosen the path I took of building something entirely your own to prove your worth? There's no right or wrong answer because everyone's situation is different, but I'm genuinely curious about how you would have handled such a devastating betrayal from someone you trusted completely. Your perspective in the comments could help other viewers who are dealing with similar family drama or career disappointments, so please share your thoughts and experiences below. This community thrives on real stories from real people who understand what it's like to overcome adversity. Here's the deeper question that I hope this story has planted in your mind. Do you believe revenge ever truly brings peace? Or does it just feed more anger and resentment that ultimately hurts you more than the people who wronged you? My experience taught me that the most satisfying revenge isn't destroying someone else's success. It's building your own success so undeniably impressive that they can't ignore or dismiss your accomplishments anymore. When Dad saw me accepting that industry award, the look in his eyes wasn't fear or anger. It was genuine pride mixed with regret for having underestimated me for so many years. That moment of recognition felt infinitely better than any act of destruction or retaliation could have, because it proved my worth without diminishing anyone else's dignity or success. If you're currently going through your own family drama, career disappointment, or feeling like people don't believe in your potential, I want you to remember this. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time is right now. You don't need anyone's permission, approval, or financial support to start building something meaningful. You just need the courage to take the first step and the determination to keep going when things get difficult. My story proves that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the best thing that ever happened to you, but only if you choose to use that pain as motivation, rather than letting it define your limitations. The world is full of people who are waiting for someone else to give them opportunities, but the people who succeed are the ones who create their own opportunities regardless of their circumstances. Before I sign off, I want to let you know that this is just the beginning of the stories I'll be sharing about overcoming adversity, building success from nothing, and proving wrong the people who underestimate your potential. Next week, I'll be telling you about what happened when Brennan Industries, the company that bought my dad's business, actually approached me about a partnership deal that would have blown your mind with its irony and awkwardness. If you want to hear how that conversation went and what I decided to do about working with the company that essentially destroyed my original life plans, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because that story involves even more family drama and business intrigue than this one did. Thank you for listening to my story, for engaging with this content, and for being part of a community that believes ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they refuse to give up on themselves. I'll see you in the next video, and remember, your legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you build when everyone else counts you out.